The motel. Identity begins like a classic Killer Among Us mystery. During a violent storm that blocks every road, 10 strangers end up stranded at an old motel in the middle of nowhere. Among them are a limousine driver, a famous actress, a father and son traveling with the family's mother, a police officer transporting a convicted criminal, and several other travelers who, at first glance, seem to have absolutely nothing in common. It doesn't take long before the guests begin dying one by one. A motel room key is found beside each body, creating a kind of countdown. As they try to figure out who the killer is, they notice increasingly bizarre coincidences. They all share the same birthday.
Louisiana, May 10th. Me, Larry Washington, May 10th.
And even their last names follow a pattern. Each one is named after a U.S. state. It feels like something much bigger is happening.
Paris, Nevada. George, York.
At the same time, the movie cuts to another storyline. A serial killer named Malcolm Rivers is about to be executed, but his psychiatrist is trying to convince the court that Malcolm suffers from dissociative identity disorder and shouldn't be held responsible for his crimes in the same way. Then comes the first major twist: the motel never existed. All of those characters are actually different personalities living inside Malcolm's mind. The goal of the treatment is to make those personalities eliminate one another until only a single stable identity remains, the one that isn't responsible for the murders. Just when it seems everything has been resolved, the film delivers one final surprise. The most dangerous personality wasn't the police officer or the criminal, as everyone believed. It was Timmy, the little boy who spent the entire movie looking completely innocent. He faked his own death to avoid suspicion and take control at the perfect moment. While inside Malcolm's mind, Timmy eliminates the last peaceful personality, in the real world he awakens inside the serial killer's body and murders his own psychiatrist while being transported to the psychiatric facility. It's an ending that catches almost everyone off guard because it turns the least suspicious character into the true mastermind behind the entire tragedy. Anyone who watched this movie for the first time never imagined that the child was the real killer. The pie. But what happens when the plot twist is revealed at the very beginning of the movie? Soft and Quiet makes it clear within its opening minutes that something is wrong, but it does so in an incredibly clever way. Instead of immediately revealing its premise, the film follows Emily, an elementary school teacher who seems to be living just another ordinary day. The first scene shows her taking a pregnancy test in a public restroom. The result is never explained at that moment, and the story simply moves on as if it weren't important. Shortly afterward, Emily casually talks with one of her students while waiting for his mother to arrive. Everything feels so ordinary that it's easy to believe you're watching nothing more than an indie drama.
Teach people how to respect you. Stand up for yourself.
Soon after, Emily meets a friend named Leslie, and the two head to a small church where Emily is hosting a meeting. Up to that point, the film carefully keeps all of its cards hidden. The conversations are vague, nobody explains the purpose of the gathering, and more people gradually arrive. Then comes the story's first major shock. Emily places a pie on the table decorated with that German symbol. Within seconds, everything changes. The seemingly harmless meeting reveals its true nature. The group is made up of white supremacist women, sharing racist, anti-Semitic, and xenophobic beliefs. The movie completely changes genres in just a few moments.
My daddy was the chapter president of the KKK in
What
Valley.
looked like a social drama suddenly becomes a suffocating thriller about extremism and radicalization. It's one of the best examples of an early plot twist. The reveal happens just over 10 minutes into the film, yet completely changes how you interpret everything you've seen before. Another detail that makes the movie even more intense is that Soft and Quiet is filmed to appear as a single continuous take, with no visible cuts. That choice forces the audience to experience every moment alongside the characters in real time, without any breaks or shifts in perspective.
No, 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 no.
The final prank. Milk and Cereal follows Milk and Seven, two friends who run a prank channel famous for taking their jokes to absurd extremes. The story begins when Seven prepares a birthday prank for Milk. Using a gun loaded with blanks and a hired actor, they stage a fake shooting during a party. Everything goes according to plan, and it seems like just another video for their channel. Shortly afterward, a supposed counter prank takes place. A man named Greg apparently kidnaps both of them and takes them into a remote desert area. In the middle of the panic, Seven grabs the gun and fires in self-defense. Only then does Milk reveal that the entire kidnapping was another prank and that Greg was also a hired actor.
Wait.
Yeah, dude. It's fake.
The problem is, Greg actually dies. The two believe someone accidentally replaced the blank rounds with real bullets. Terrified, they decide to hide the body before their lives and careers are destroyed. From that point on, the tone changes completely. Seven is consumed by guilt, while Milk grows increasingly cold and determined to cover up the crime. But the real twist comes near the end. Milk records a confession, revealing that none of it was an accident. He intentionally switched the ammunition so Seven would unknowingly kill Greg. And that was only part of the plan. The revelation gets even darker when we learn that Milk had been a serial killer long before before the events of the movie. In the end, he confesses that he'd been kidnapping and murdering people in secret, and that he wanted Seven to become his masterpiece. His goal was to psychologically manipulate his best friend until the guilt became unbearable, and Seven eventually took his own life, becoming Milk's 7th victim without Milk ever having to kill him directly. When Seven watches the confession, he enters the room with a gun and shoots Milk. Moments later, a second gunshot is heard. But the movie never reveals what actually happened, and there's even a brief post-credit scene, leaving the audience wondering who, if anyone, survived that final twisted prank. The film is available on YouTube and was directed by Curry Barker, the same filmmaker behind Obsession. The Intruders. The Others begins like a classic haunted house story. It follows Grace Stewart, a deeply religious mother living in a huge, isolated mansion shortly after World War II. While waiting for her husband to return from the war, she raises her 2 children, Anne and Nicholas, who suffer from a rare condition that prevents them from being exposed to sunlight. Because of that, the house remains permanently dark, with heavy curtains covering every window and strict rules about opening and closing doors. Everything changes when 3 servants arrive to work at the mansion. Strange things begin happening almost immediately. Footsteps echo through the hallways. Doors mysteriously open.
How a boy can get in and out of this room if it's locked.
Objects move on their own, and Anne insists she's been talking to a little boy named Victor, whom no one else can see.
Who's Victor?
The boy that was here a moment ago.
Grace believes it's all just her daughter's imagination, but the supernatural events become harder and harder to ignore. The film constantly leads the audience to believe that the family is being haunted by ghosts. But near the end comes one of horror cinema's most famous plot twists. During a seance held inside the house, Grace discovers that she, her children, and even the servants have been dead the entire time. They are the ghosts haunting the mansion. The mysterious intruders Grace had been trying to drive away were actually a living family that had recently moved into the house. Victor, the boy Anne kept mentioning from the very beginning, was never a ghost. He was a real child who saw Grace and her family as the haunted spirits. The revelation becomes even more devastating when we learn that, overwhelmed by despair during the war, Grace killed her own children before taking her own life.
I killed my children.
The trauma was so overwhelming that she completely erased those memories and continued living as though nothing had ever happened. The most impressive part is that the movie plants subtle clues throughout the entire story, but they only make sense after the reveal. The Ritual. The Cabin in the Woods starts exactly like every classic slasher movie. 5 college students decide to spend the weekend at an isolated cabin deep in the woods. The group seems deliberately made up of classic horror stereotypes: the innocent girl, the athlete, the smart student, the outgoing party girl, and the stoner. It looks like another story you've already seen dozens of times. But there's one enormous difference. While the students travel to the cabin completely unaware of what's happening, the movie reveals that everything is being controlled by a team working inside a massive underground laboratory. They manipulate virtually everything. They release chemicals into the environment to influence the victim's behavior, control the cabin's doors, and even place bets on which monster will be responsible for the killings. When the friends explore the cabin's basement, they discover a collection of strange objects. Without realizing it, they accidentally awaken a family of murderous zombies. But that was only one of dozens of monsters waiting to be unleashed. Had they interacted with a different object, they could have released an entirely different nightmare. The biggest plot twist comes when Dana and Marty are the only survivors and discover a hidden elevator leading down to the laboratory. There, they find hundreds of imprisoned monsters and finally learn the truth. The entire operation exists to carry out an ancient sacrificial ritual. The 5 friends must die in a specific order to prevent ancient sleeping gods from awakening and destroying humanity.
As long as they accept our sacrifice, they remain below.
That revelation completely changes the way you see the movie. Every horror cliche was never a coincidence. Within the story, they're all part of a ritual that must follow strict rules. In the end, Dana faces an impossible choice: kill Marty to complete the ritual and save the world, or let everything end. She refuses to sacrifice her friend, and the two simply accept their fate. Seconds later, a gigantic hand rises from beneath the earth, revealing that the ancient gods have finally awakened and are about to wipe out humanity. The Closet. A Tale of Two Sisters is one of those movies that deliberately confuses the audience. The story begins with Sumi returning home after spending time in a psychiatric hospital. She reunites with her father and her younger sister, Soo-yeon, but the atmosphere is anything but welcoming. The house is silent, isolated, and dominated by the presence of their stepmother, Yoon-ju, a cold woman who constantly seems to pick on both girls. Sumi does everything she can to protect Soo-yeon, who lives in constant fear and frequently becomes the target of her stepmother's cruel behavior. Meanwhile, their father remains distant, almost always refusing to interfere, as if the family's tension weren't already overwhelming enough. Unexplained events begin taking over the house. Nightmares, ghostly apparitions, and strange noises make the movie seem like a classic haunted house story. But the major twist completely changes everything we've seen up to that point. During a confrontation with Eunju, Sumi's father finally forces her to face reality. Soo-yeon isn't alive. She died long before the events of the film. Even worse, their stepmother wasn't even living in the house during that time. The explanation is heartbreaking. Unable to cope with the trauma, Sumi created an alternate reality. Throughout the entire movie, she's unknowingly playing two different roles. Sometimes she behaves as though she's talking to her sister, while at other moments she takes on the personality of her own stepmother, reliving the conflicts that destroyed her family. Everything was happening only inside her mind. Later flashbacks reveal the true origin of the tragedy. The girl's mother hid herself inside a closet. While trying to help her, Soo-yeon became trapped beneath the heavy wardrobe and died before she could escape. The most infuriating part is that Eunju, who at the time was the mother's nurse and the father's mistress, saw the little girl struggling for her life and deliberately chose not to help her. Even after providing a psychological explanation for most of the story, the film still saves one final supernatural surprise. In the last scene, when the real Eunju returns to the house, Soo-yeon's ghost finally appears for real and kills her. It's confirmation that not everything had a rational explanation. That final touch makes the story even more disturbing and helps turn A Tale of Two Sisters into one of the greatest classics of Asian horror. The Village's Secret. The village follows the residents of Covington, a small community that appears to exist in the late 19th century. Surrounded by a dense forest, the village lives under strict rules designed to avoid mysterious creatures known only as those we do not speak of. No one is allowed to enter the woods. The color red is forbidden because it supposedly attracts the monsters, and whenever danger appears, everyone rushes to hide. At the center of the story is Lucius Hunt, a young man who believes the village needs to travel beyond the forest to obtain medicine. The village elders forbid anyone from leaving, insisting that the creatures make the journey impossible. Everything changes when Lucius is seriously wounded by Noah Percy, a mentally troubled young man who becomes jealous of Lucius's relationship with Ivy Walker, the daughter of the village leader. Since Lucius urgently needs medicine, Ivy volunteers to cross the forest herself. Before she leaves, her father reveals the film's first major truth: the monsters never existed. The creatures were nothing more than costumes used by the elders to keep everyone trapped inside the village through fear. The plan had worked for years because no one ever dared question the rules. Even so, Ivy is still chased through the woods by what appears to be one of the monsters. Using her intelligence, she tricks the creature into falling into a deep pit. Only later do we discover it was actually Noah wearing one of the costumes secretly kept by the elders. But the biggest twist is still to come. After leaving the forest, Ivy finds a security fence, a paved road, and a police vehicle. Suddenly, it becomes clear that the story never took place in the 19th century. The village actually exists in the present day. We then learn that the elders are people traumatized by violent crimes who chose to abandon modern society altogether. Using Edward Walker's fortune, they created an isolated community inside a protected wildlife reserve, recreating a 19th century lifestyle and inventing monsters to keep their children from ever discovering the truth. Behind the Wall. The boy follows Greta, a young American woman who travels to England hoping to rebuild her life after escaping an abusive ex-boyfriend. She lands a job as a nanny at the Heelshire mansion, only to discover that the child she's supposed to care for is actually a porcelain doll named Brames. The elderly couple treats the doll as though it were a real little boy. They talk to him, serve him meals, and hand Greta a strict list of rules she must follow every day: play music, read bedtime stories, say goodnight, and never leave Brahms alone. At first, Greta completely ignores those rules, but everything changes when strange things begin to happen. The doll starts appearing in places where she never left it. Clothes mysteriously disappear, doors open on their own, and the sound of a child can be heard throughout the house at night. Meanwhile, Malcolm, the delivery man who regularly visits the mansion, tells Greta that the real Brahms died in a fire when he was only 8 years old.
On his 8th birthday. Such a tragedy.
He also reveals that the boy was considered very strange and had once been suspected of being involved in the death of a young girl years before the fire. Convinced that the boy's spirit inhabits the doll, Greta begins following every rule and even forms an emotional bond with it. But everything changes when her abusive ex-boyfriend, Cole, discovers where she's hiding and breaks into the mansion to force her back to the United States. During their confrontation, he grabs the doll and smashes it against the floor. That's when the movie delivers its biggest twist. A mirror shatters. From a hidden passage concealed inside the walls emerges the real Brahms. He never died in the fire. Now fully grown and wearing a porcelain mask resembling the doll's face, he's spent more than 20 years secretly living inside the walls of the mansion. Suddenly, every mystery falls into place. There was never a ghost. Brahms was the one moving the doll, stealing objects, making noises, and spying on Greta through the hidden passages. His own parents had hidden his existence all those years, and before they died, they planned to leave Greta behind so she would take their place and continue caring for their son. The perfect body. The autopsy of Jane Doe follows Tommy Tilden and his son Austin, two coroners who run a family-owned morgue. Just as they're about to end their shift, the police bring them the body of an unidentified young woman found buried beneath the basement of a house where several people died under mysterious circumstances. Since nobody knows who she is, she's simply given the name Jane Doe. At first glance, the body appears completely normal. There are no visible injuries, cuts, or signs of violence. But as the autopsy progresses, the discoveries become increasingly impossible to explain. Inside, her body tells a completely different story. Her bones show evidence of old fractures, her lungs bear severe burn damage, her tongue has been removed, and several internal organs display horrific injuries that don't match the flawless condition of her skin. Inside her stomach, father and son discover a strange flower and a piece of cloth covered in ancient symbols. At the same time, the morgue slowly turns into a trap. The power fails, doors stop working, and mysterious figures begin appearing in the dark hallways. The film initially makes the audience believe that some ghost is haunting the protagonist. But the truth is even more disturbing. During the examination, Tommy realizes that Jane's brain activity is somehow still present, meaning she's still alive in some impossible way.
She's still alive.
After translating the symbols found inside her body, he concludes that Jane was an innocent victim of the Salem witch trials in the 17th century. But the truth is, Jane was never a witch. She was tortured by people who believed they were destroying evil. Instead, the unimaginable suffering inflicted upon her transformed her into something supernatural.
Accidentally created the very thing they were trying to destroy.
Rather than destroying an evil force, they created one. In other words, she truly became a witch. By the end of the film, neither Tommy nor Austin manages to escape Jane Doe's influence, and both are killed. When the police arrive the following morning, they find the morgue completely silent, and Jane's body lying exactly where it was, perfectly intact, as though no autopsy had ever taken place. In the final scene, while her body is being transported by ambulance to another city, one of her toes twitches, revealing that the cycle is about to begin all over again. On screen now is another video featuring plot twists in horror movies that you never saw coming. Click here to watch it. I'll see you there.